What is up, guys? This is Larry, and today I want to talk about the conventional wisdom that would have you believe that the more options the better, right? If I go to a restaurant with a group of friends, if they have 100 different meal options, then there's a good chance that all of us are going to find something we like. But can you ever have too many options? Think about a booth that sells 3 different juices, and you stand at the booth, you try all 3 juices, and you decide which one you like, and you pick it and you walk away. But now let's say you go to a booth that serves 12 or 15 different juices. Well, now you end up creating a whole bunch of different problems, because by the time you try juice number 10, you forgot what juice number 1 or 2 tastes like. And on top of that, by the time you get to the 9th or most likely the 6th or 7th juice, you're already tired of sampling all these different juices. So in the end, you end up making no decision at all and walk out with nothing. Or maybe you see the booth from far away and realize that they have a whole bunch of different samples for a bunch of different juices, and you realize that's going to be too much of a time commitment to sample all the different juices, so it's not even worth your time approaching the booth. So the reality is this booth loses out on business opportunity because it provided too much. And this all relates to something known as choice overload. And not only does choice overload relate to businesses, but it can relate to things like investments or even things like finding a different job out there. And if you stick around, not only will I explain how it may be costing you, but I'll also explain the ways to combat the effects of choice overload. To start, think about trying to encourage somebody out there to save more money. So you end up telling them about 2 or 3 different bank account options out there, and that the saving accounts are very basic. They just accrue a certain amount of percent interest, and that's all there really is to it. There's probably a good chance that they're going to think about the 2 or 3 options and make a decision. But think about this person if I told them a whole bunch of different saving accounts out there, and on top of that, I told them about a whole bunch of different CD options out there. They have 1 year, they have 5 years, 10 years, and on top of that, I tell them about what's called a high yield savings account, and it begins to confuse them, and then in the end, they decide, you know what, it's a little bit overwhelming, and they have this choice overload, so they don't end up saving at all because it's just too much for them to make a decision. Now, the reality is this person could be taking extra time to make this decision because there's just so many different factors to consider. Their certain financial position, where they're at right now, how long they want to be able to save this money, whether they want to save it for 3 years or 5 years. So it may not just be laziness that they're not making the decision, but the reality is there's so many factors that it begins to have this choice overload. And this whole theory of choice overload was actually tested. What they did is they ran an experiment of 100 people that passed by 2 different booths, and one booth had 24 different jams and the other booth only had 6 jams, and the majority of people actually stopped at the booth that had more jams, the one that had 24 jams. Now, 2 certain odd things happened in this situation. Both booths only ended up having people sample 1 to 2 different jams. Nobody was willing to sample 5, 6, or at the booth that had 24 jams, no one was willing to sample all 24. And if you think about it, that makes sense because nobody wants to be the person there standing, spending everybody else's time in line and taste, 6 or 7 different samples. And the second really interesting thing that happened is that the booth that had 6 jams, even though it only had 40 people out of the 100 stop at its booth, it ended up having 30 people buy its jams, versus the booth that had 24 jams, even though it had 60 people stop at its booth, it ended up converting into 3 people buying that jam. So even though the booth with 6 jams had 1/4 the options as far as compared to the one that had 24 jams, it ended up having 10 times more sales. So if you found that, shocking as I did, go ahead and hit that like button for me. So this is really interesting because if you think about the amount of work and time and effort that goes into creating more jams, to create 24 different jams takes an immense amount of effort, but the payoff isn't necessarily there. So I'm going to talk about a few reasons why this happens, and the main one being what's known as decision paralysis, but I'm going to talk about a few others first. One of the first reasons could be the fact that you have 2 different types of people. You have the people that are just kind of out and about, having fun and exploring. They're more likely to go to the booth that has a wider variety of options, versus you have the second group of people that are ready to make a decision. You can kind of think about this scenario in terms of buying a hat. If you're somebody that's ready to buy a sports hat, you're going to go to a store that sells strictly sports hats. You're not going to go to a hat store that sells a huge variety of hats. You want to go to the store that's specifically catered to what you're looking for. Compare that with a group of people that's just kind of out and about and having fun with a group of friends. They're going to want to go to the hat store that has a huge variety of hats. The ones that offer, silly hats, sports hats, as well as formal hats. Are formal hats even a thing? The second reason could be if you think about it in terms of quality. If I go to a jam store that sells 10 billion different jams, I'm going to kind of be a little bit skeptical as far as how much care is given into each jam. Versus if I go to a specialty store, a little, boutique store that only has 10 or 12 different jams, then I'm going to think that they have a lot more care into those different flavors. So why would stores out there offer a variety of options when it kind of seems like it only hurts them to offer more options? Well, the reality is different stores can kind of position them in different ways. And this is what's known as positioning. And if you think about a company such as Trader Joe's versus a company such as Walmart, you go to Walmart because you know that they offer so many different products. You can buy a lawnmower while you also buy, pick up some eggs. Versus if you go to Trader Joe's, that's not necessarily going to be the option, but you have a pretty good feeling that the quality that Trader Joe's is going to offer for each individual product is at a higher level than, say, what Walmart would offer. Now, the last reason that the booth that had 24 jams ended up doing worse than the booth that only had 6 jams is because of this whole idea of decision paralysis, which basically just means is that the feeling of choice overload is so strong that you end up just not making a decision at all. Now, there's a lot to it when it comes to decision paralysis. Part of it is this overwhelming feeling, and people don't like to have that pressure, so the best way to escape that feeling is to just walk away from that purchase decision altogether. The other factor could be this fear of regret. I don't necessarily want to make a bad decision, and when I have more choices, I feel like that bad feeling is more prominent, or I'm more likely to end up regretting my decision. Versus if there's only 2 options or even no option at all, then there's no feeling of regret because it was my only option. So how do we combat this idea of choice overload or decision paralysis? Well, one of the ways is to make sure you have a strong preference to a certain product. And this is actually why some companies don't really care about choice overload and offer such a wide variety of different options and goods, is because if I go into Walmart, for example, and I know that I only like Skippy's creamy peanut butter, then it really doesn't matter anything else that's kind of thrown my way. I don't care about the different crunchy peanut butter options that they offer. I don't care about the different brands for creamy peanut butter because I know that I like Skippy's creamy peanut butter. So that's, the choice overload isn't really a factor anymore. So my suggestion here is to basically break down decisions into a context that you do have a strong preference for something. For example, in the peanut butter situation, I obviously knew which peanut butter brand and the specific kind that I liked. But back to the jam example, perhaps I don't necessarily know which jam I actually like, but I do know certain factors. I know that I at least like, certain berry type jams. So then that can eliminate the peach jam and the apple jam. So that's kind of one way to kind of combat this choice overload effect, is you're basically breaking down and segregating different decisions. Which brings me to my second point, which is to basically group different items into different categories. For example, if I'm going shopping for a new jacket, rather than just go to a jacket store and just try to buy a jacket that I like, I can basically group things into different ways. So I end up deciding which is my favorite winter jacket as far as warmth, and which is the favorite jacket that I like as far as style, and which is going to be the favorite jacket that I like as far as representing a certain sports team or something like that. And then once I have those 3 different items for those 3 different groups, then I basically all I have to do as far as making my decision is which do I care about most? Do I care about warmth most? Do I care about representing my sports team the most? Or do I care about style the most? So that ends up kind of making that decision a lot easier to make. Now, from a business perspective, the best way to take advantage of this choice overload is basically to eliminate that problem altogether by offering some kind of sampler option. For example, if I'm that jam store and I'm selling 24 different jams, perhaps I sell a sampler that basically has 12 different jams in there, but it's a small little tiny portion. So I still end up making a sale, but I end up eliminating that problem from the consumer's perspective as far as that choice overload. They don't have to make a decision. They can just end up having all the options. And this is something that some grocery stores actually do in a pretty creative way. Rather than have, a 6-pack of 20 different options on the shelf and you have to pick a 6-pack of the same exact drinks, you end up kind of fearing that decision because you don't want to regret and be stuck with, 5 different, drinks of soda that you don't necessarily care for. But if I end up allowing you to build your own sampler and end up selecting just an individual can of different sodas and end up building your own pack, that eliminates that choice overload problem. Now, the final way to combat choice overload is to basically batch decisions as well as sticking to that batch of decisions. For example, if today I'm trying to decide what I want to eat for dinner, that seems to be a situation that a lot of people run into as far as choice overload is it's really difficult to decide. Do I want burgers because I haven't eaten that in a while and I'm kind of craving that, but I'm also craving pizza, so I don't really know what to make. But if I make this on a weekly basis, I can end up having both and just sticking to that decision. So on Sunday, I can decide, you know what, I really want pizza, I'll have that on Monday. I also really want burgers, I'll have that on Tuesday. So I end up having both. Now the trick obviously is to make sure you actually stick to that decision, because on Monday I could just end up throwing that, offer all together and end up deciding, I don't want anything. I actually want burritos. So that ends up not really helping with that problem. But batching decisions certainly is actually a way to help combat the effects of choice overload. Now, to end with somewhat of a philosophical question that I'm going to try to do on certain videos is to basically just ask, something that's kind of like a brain teaser and kind of get your own opinion on this. But if the whole idea of choice overload prevents people from making decisions, so back to that investment example, if I'm trying to get and encourage people to save out there, but there's so many different banks and so many different investment products that it actually discourages people from saving, then, should we eliminate that competition? Because obviously having a variety of options and a variety of companies encourages competition, but yet that competition also hurts the consumer in the sense that they have this choice overload. So what is kind of the right answer to handle that situation? Feel free to comment your thoughts down below. And, there's no right or wrong answer. I'm just kind of curious what other people out there think about that situation. And if you like behavioral finance or these types of topics, please give this video a big thumbs up so that way I know that people appreciate these types of videos. And if you like behavioral finance as well as economics or personal finance, those are topics I really enjoy talking about. So please hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for more.